Thank you, Kate. Great to be here at the Chamber, starting this year. So before I introduce our guest speaker today, maybe this is a little bit out of line, but Phil, do you want to give a brief plug for your event tomorrow evening?
Sure. The Friends of Cotton Peak's 10th anniversary gala is right here tomorrow night in this room. Hopefully everybody has tickets because there's only 2 left. So if you are interested, see me afterwards.
Thank you. That's great. So you've sold over 100, 120 something.
110.
110. Wonderful. So I'm very pleased to introduce Darin Hayes, who has been with D.A. Davidson for 10 years now. He's in the Coeur d'Alene office where he actually has 3 different jobs, really. He's the co-branch manager there. He's a portfolio manager, and he is an associate vice president with our organization. And just also wanted to recognize that we've got a couple of other folks from our Sandpoint office here. Nancy Hadley and her son Dan, who just joined us a couple months ago in the office. So Darin's had an interesting career. He's been with Davidson 10 years. Before that, he was with People to People in Spokane. Everybody familiar with that nonprofit organization? But that's where his history stops. When I asked him for some background before that, he said, well, it gets complicated. So I think that anyone who's publishing a book called Beer Money should have a bit of a mysterious air about him. And so I only know about the last 15 years of Darin's career. The rest is going to remain mysterious. Perhaps he'll mention it when he talks today. But as Ann was saying to me, this is a great read. And Ann, what was your comment about that you could just take and cover up the word beer?
You put a post-it note over the word beer, and this book works for purses, shoes, vacations, thrift stores. Not that anyone has any bad habits in here, not that beer is a bad habit. And it's only about a 2-hour read. This is a great book, and it's fun.
And Ann's actually the person who was responsible for helping to bring Darin here today. So thank you very much. Darin, are you ready?
I am ready. I'm moving a few things around, so I need this space right here.
So thank you for coming up. Here you go.
I'm going to try to do it without the microphone, if you can hear me. Because I do like to move around.
I heard a no.
Well, I'm going to get out there, and then I'll stand right next to that first.
Okay.
So, everybody have a good Christmas? Christmas is over. Everybody get what they wanted for Christmas. I remember one Christmas when I was in college. My dad gave me this personal finance book. It was a really crummy Christmas. I never read this book. And I never read it for a couple of reasons. Number one, I didn't have any money at the time to manage, so I figured, what's the point? Number two, I was quite frankly just interested in other things like beer. And since I didn't have any money and I really liked beer, one thing I used to do is I daydreamed about this thing that I created called the Magic Fridge. And the Magic Fridge is really cool because what the Magic Fridge does is it creates beer. All you got to do is you put one beer inside the fridge, you close the door, you forget about it for a while, you open the door, and the Magic Fridge will turn that one beer into a 6-pack of beer. Now you could either drink the 6-pack, or if you were disciplined enough, you could leave it in there, and pretty soon that 6-pack would turn into a half-rack. A half-rack would turn into a case, and eventually the case would turn into a keg of beer, and now you could actually have a decent party. Now I didn't know it at the time, but there is a thing like the Magic Fridge, but it works with money instead of beer. The thing's called compound interest. And I never really understood what compound interest is. And as a refresher, what compound interest does is it creates money. And compound interest is just like the Magic Fridge. You just need an initial deposit or an investment. You need some kind of rate of return on that. And then most importantly, you need time. And then you can create more money. Now, compound interest may not seem as interesting as the Magic Fridge, but when you consider that you can use money to buy beer, then compound interest gets a little more interesting. And again, it's a concept a lot of people don't really understand. I never did till I was out of college, and in my current line of work, I encounter a lot of people all the time that don't really understand, what it is. I think that's a big problem that we have. Because dealing with money is not, it's not something that we get to choose to do. It's a daily obligation. Every single little purchasing or savings decision that we make, it has consequences and it has opportunity costs, no matter how small those little decisions are. And so, you know, in my opinion, which I think I'm allowed and expected to have since I'm the speaker today, I think you can get through life just fine without remembering a thing about your Introduction to Humanities course, but if you don't understand how money works, chances are you're probably never going to be financially secure. So why do we have this problem? I think there's a few reasons. Number one, in a lot of states, financial education is not mandatory in schools. You know, and Idaho is one of those states. Now I know that there's a lot of districts in our state that do offer some kind of course. There's a lot of teachers that do a really good job of trying to integrate financial education into curriculum. But since it's not mandatory, you know, we still don't catch everybody. And so if you don't have that in school, then you have to learn about money from family and friends. And if they never really had a good grasp of it, then what you're stuck with is you're stuck with something like this 1,000-page, single-spaced, 10-point type book that doesn't even have any picture. Now, wouldn't it be better if perhaps there was something that was, I don't know, maybe 115 pages, double-spaced, 12-point type that had pictures? If only such a book existed. But just having a brief book with some pictures, you know, that in itself is not often enough either, because it's the presentation of concepts that matter. Some of this stuff can get pretty complicated. And so the way people really learn is if you can find a way to relate concepts to something that they already understand. That's when people really start to grasp concepts. So I think that this book, Beer Money, does that. I'm really happy that you're allowing me to share some of the ideas today. The original inspiration that I had for using beer to explain money came about because I'm a big fan of both things. And a number of years ago, I tried to figure out a way to combine those two concepts, and I created a little monthly seminar that I called Beers, Bulls, and Bears. And this was down at a deli in Coeur d'Alene. And a group of people, I ran this, we get together every month, and we talked about what was going on in the markets, we talked about financial concepts, and we'd have a beer tasting. It was awesome. And I found that when we got to when I was trying to answer some questions that were kind of complicated, and I could tell people weren't quite getting it, I found ways to relate those concepts and explain them in the concept of beer, in the context of beer. And what I discovered was that people, not only did they begin to understand the concept, but then they retained the knowledge because it was related to something they were already familiar with. So what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to run through a few of the ways that we can use beer to explain money. And the first thing we're going to do is return to the magic fridge and compound interest through something that I call the six-pack rule. And the six-pack rule, some of you may have heard of this by another name. It's called the Rule of 72. The Rule of 72 is kind of dry and boring, so we call it the six-pack rule. Now, you can remember the six-pack rule because conveniently there are 6 12-ounce bottles, a six-pack of beer, 6 times 12 is 72, so we got the six-pack rule. Now, what the six-pack rule does is it allows us to really easily calculate how long it takes any amount of money to double. Okay, it just takes a little math. So you take the number 72, you divide it by some kind of assumed rate of return, okay, and the result is how long it takes that sum of money to double, and then that tells you how long it will take to double again. Okay, so we can look at this in practice. Let's just say that you inherit, or you get $1,000 from your dear old Aunt Gertie. Aunt Gertie passes away, you're cleaning out Aunt Gertie's house, and you find $1,000 stuffed in an empty case of Buckhorn Stubbies in the back of our pantry. I love it when I say Buckhorn Stubbies. You learn a lot about a person when they start laughing. they remember Buckhorn Stubbies. So you get this $1,000, and you want to make the most of this, right? So you start looking for different investments, and you evaluate some alternatives. You find one investment that's sort of conservative, it might give you a 3% rate of return, something else a little more moderate, maybe gives you 6%, and something that's pretty aggressive, maybe that you can get 12%. Now I'll tell you, 12% is tough to get, but it makes the math easy for this demonstration, so we're just going to go with it, okay? So if we use the 6-pack rule and we say, okay, I got a 3% rate of return on that $1,000, it's going to take 24 years. We're going to start from age 18 for that amount of money to double. It becomes $2,000. And then again, by the time you're 66, you turn that $1,000 into $4,000. That's really not very exciting. But if we can get 6%, now we're going to double our money in 12 years. So now our 1,000 turns into 2,000, our 2 into 4, 4, 8. Now we got 16,000. Now 12, again, it's hard to do, but for illustration, it's fun. Now stuff starts doubling every 6 years. So over that same time period, at that rate of return, you get to $256,000. This is the magic of compound interest. And this is just a one-time deposit. If you think about somebody that's doing this on a pretty consistent basis, you can really start to see how compound interest can actually work pretty well. Now the problem is, if somebody doesn't understand compound interest at an early age, or just the reality is that life gets in the way, you know, the most important factor here is time. And if your coaster looks more like this, at age 18 I'll never be old, and I'm at a party, and then you start getting, gosh, I really should start thinking about this. Then you can see the impact that delayed time has on your ability to really create wealth. So that's the 6-pack rule. Everybody remember that rule. I want to go into a few parts of this book. And the first I'm going to show you, and you do have some books on your table you can thumb through if you'd like to, but this is the table of contents to this book. This is how I organized this. The first thing I did, I sat down, I said, you know, there's logical steps that a person needs to take to become financially successful. And so I laid this out into something that I call the pub crawl to financial success. And each chapter in this book covers one of those logical steps. Now we all know that there's rules about a pub crawl. Right? You got to start at a certain place, you go on to the next pub, you have your drink, you got to pace yourself along the way to make sure you finish, you know, and then you're at the end. And dealing with money like the pub crawl, it's got rules. It's no fair cheating or trying to jump ahead or you're consuming too much too early, because in all likelihood you're going to end up in a place you really don't want to be. Maybe like the back of a van or something like that. So you want to follow these steps. So we talked about the magic fridge and the 6-pack rule. Now one of the first things you want to do, going over here, is look for free beer. Always. We always want to look for free beer. Now in this case it's free money. The way most of us can get free money is through our company-sponsored retirement plans, 401k plans. Because a lot of these plans, they offer matching dollars on what you put in. But even here, I'm surprised how often not everybody takes full advantage of that matching contribution. And I think one of the reasons, again, is just the presentation of it. You go to a meeting, there's some guy that looks like me, suit, stand in front of you, saying you're now eligible for your 401k plan. We have our matching contribution, 100% of the first 3%, 0.5%, you know, blah, 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 and people just kind of glaze over. Well, there's a better way of doing it. I'm going to illustrate it now, but I need a volunteer. I need a beer drinker.